I feel like I can rise up to this challenge.
Okay.
Number one, don't have cyber insurance. Or even worse, have cyber insurance, but don't meet the obligation of cyber insurance. And then they have an event and they get denied their claim.
Ouch. Okay.
And that is a real thing. If you have cyber insurance and you haven't read it, and it says you're supposed to have, for example, security training for your employees, and you don't, they will not pay your claim. Period.
Dang, that could be millions of dollars worth of losses.
Absolutely. And people rely on cyber insurance as a mitigating control where, if they're not going to fix the issue or directly deal with an issue, they have a safety net to give them money for an event. So that's number one. Number two is the lack of, conversations at the executive and board level around cybersecurity. It's just not something they talk about. It's not something they think about.
Welcome to Securing the Future podcast with your hosts, Jesse Metters and Ramin Lamay.
All right, we're back with another episode of Securing the Future podcast. It has been a little while. We've taken a little break for the summer. We did not have a guest today. We actually just wanted to do an episode, just Ramin and I, and get all of our listeners and viewers updated on what we're seeing in our worlds, because our worlds are very different, aren't they, Ramin?
They are. No, and it's good to record again. It's been a minute, and we've been enjoying summer, and it's been a busy summer. So
yeah,
excited to just kind of catch up on what trends we see in our worlds. What are the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it's to get our listeners caught up in just our worlds, because I think, my LinkedIn can look very confusing to people. Like, what does he actually do? I spend most of my time as a recruiter. I do work a lot with Code Red partners, and they have definitely exposed me to an exciting world of cutting edge technology companies that are really truly transforming how we operate and the type of applications and products that we get to use every day. It's really been eye-opening into kind of this world of AI and military tech. And then I also have occasional clients that I take on through my own company, Talent, and that's been kind of at that intersection of that kind of military technology space, which I'll talk a little bit about and some trends that I'm seeing there. And then of course we work together at Tech Compass, and I lead a lot of the kind of project management, recruiting, getting our teams together and organizing and executing the projects as we take on a variety of different cybersecurity services, which I'll obviously let Ramin kind of get you updated on his world as well.
Yeah. No, I like that. I feel like that's a good idea to kind of just refresh what we do. It's hard to, decipher people's LinkedIn.
It is,
right? It's also a lot of fluff, right? Like, what does this person really do with these 20 bullets that I'm saying? Follow up what you mentioned. So I do kind of two type of engagements in my world. So I have one where I'm a practitioner, meaning I am the cybersecurity expert that's showing up, whether I'm doing an assessment or a due diligence or some kind of turnaround kind of situation. And those are relatively busy for me, and those are definitely on the increase as well, as there's more transactions happening in the private equity world. A lot of those are around private equity for me. And then we also have Tech Compass in terms of our own services that we deliver. And those services continue to evolve. It started off with just assessments and pen tests, and now we have a plethora of services, including automating compliance using technology, helping people go through like SOC 2, a more streamlined process, being able to do more integration work with acquisitions. We're also in the process of updating the website, so that should be in the next month or so. That kind of captures some of the work we've been doing, but it keeps us busy, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah, and not just busy, but I feel like we've been more productive in the last year or so. It's been good. I mean, you can definitely be busy doing anything, right? But
yeah,
what are
you? I also think about that, right? So before starting Tech Compass 2+ years ago, I really worked at one company for a number of years. I had many different roles and many different challenges, including M&A, acquiring companies, integrating companies, different strategies, different risks to tackle, but you're only really exposed to kind of one company. In the last 2.5 years, as I kind of think through what I've been exposed to, I've been exposed to over 300 companies.
Wow.
Through different flavors of services, whether it's doing a due diligence, doing an assessment, doing some kind of a fix or turnaround, or some kind of incident response tabletop, helping them build their BCP plan or programs. So, the amount of exposure in this world, that we've gotten, and the knowledge and experience of kind of what's happening in what industry, there's a lot of value to what we see. There's a lot of value into, what we take away from each of those engagements as well.
No, I agree. And I was thinking about how much I've been exposed to working closely with Code Red partners. Tom Alcock and his team are just really phenomenal, and the partnerships and relationships they built in kind of the VC community in the Bay Area, and the name and the brand that they've built in security recruiting is really top notch. I've been able to see behind the scenes with like the latest cybersecurity product companies that are leveraging AI, either building an AI native tool, building tools that are using kind of AI native infrastructure, and then like building in agentic workflows to tackle a problem that has plagued the security industry for a while. A lot of them are heavily focused around two areas. One kind of competes with the work that we do, right? Which is like automating web app pen tests. We actually, funny enough, have had 2 clients right now that we're doing work for, like a security researcher / kind of software engineer, where they're going to kind of help with integrating and training this model that would automate an entire web app pen test, using kind of like a small language model, right? That's going to obviously have some connection back into like an LLM, but privately hosted, and kind of the way that they're configuring it. Super interesting. And then the other side is obviously probably the very common one you're all hearing about, which is anything around security operations, right? How do you automate a lot of the heavy lifting, even just the mundane work that burns out SOC teams? There's a variety of different companies that we've supported now that have kind of tried to tackle different areas of security operations using agentic AI. So I think we have a ways to go before those tools truly can like automate the majority of what you do, and you can feel confident that like they're going to make good decisions. I think that's the biggest fear that I see when talking to other security leaders. You probably see the same thing, Ramin. It's like, when do we get to that point where we can truly trust these machine learning systems are going to actually make the right decisions, have the right context, and actually use the context properly? I think that I see that issue sometimes, right? So, it is definitely making a huge ripple in the industry. And then I'd love to talk about some trends as we go. What I'm seeing kind of like from a candidate perspective, what are companies looking for today? What are the hardest positions for us to fill? What are the skill sets that they're asking for? That's very interesting.
Yeah. Even to the point that you brought up with like the trends you're seeing with some of the startups. I work with a number of startups as well. And it's interesting because you're starting to see, you're not starting to see, but you're seeing the trend where companies are, definitely making sure AI is baked into all their products. So that's becoming kind of like the norm. And then you're also starting to see, on the industry side where people are cutting budgets, right? So those security operations centers you mentioned, they have less dollars today than they did 2 years ago, right? So the vendors are, trying to automate more to deal with those situations, right? But, it hasn't quite gotten there. I still see a tremendous amount of tools at each company that are not integrated, right? So it still requires a lot of people. You have 5 different tools that don't talk to each other. You have to have a person kind of go between them. But over time, as, integrations, become better in and out, meaning, the traffic that comes in and the output that goes out of these tools are more actionable, I think you're going to see less demand on people for commodity type of services like being a security analyst. If you see this type of traffic, it follows this pattern, you're interacting with your EDR tools, your firewalls. You should be able to quarantine or block an IP address without a person getting involved, right? To some degree, there's risk today because if you get it wrong, you could, be turning off legitimate traffic, impacting business. So the trust isn't there, but in the future, not far off. And then it's going to be about adoption, right? I think we'll get the solutions first, as we always see, but then adoption is always, depends on the industry. Some are going to be leading, some are going to be lagging. But to your point, Jesse, I think that also affects like the job market, right? So then that means some of those more general roles or basic roles are going to start going away, and we're seeing that trend as well. There's a number of companies that I work with where they don't have a whole lot of budget for security, so they're trying to hire more generalists that could do compliance work, they can do security leadership work, they can roll up their sleeves and roll out a tool. So, you're not seeing as many different roles when, your budgets are tighter either.
Yeah. I think number one growth area, if I was somebody young going into college and I wanted to get into the cybersecurity industry, the number one thing I would do is learn how to program in Python. That seems to be like on every job description, every role, especially I'm noticing in like roles that are heavily focused around detection engineering, which is a huge area, right? Because if you can write the right detections, you get the right alerts, and configuring alerting, and of course, trying to build AI tools that can do that for you. But there's a lot of need for folks that get it, like they've been on the practitioner side and they can come in and either work within a new tool, right, to kind of like build some workflows and detections that you can train a model to do for you, right, and then sell that to the end user, the security leader or team. And then there's on the other side of the corporate, kind of enterprise security roles, they're all heavily focused around automation, leveraging Python scripting and even some programming to kind of code your way through problems. And because everything has moved to cloud for a lot of companies, it's infrastructure as code deployments, it's Terraform, it's understanding how to configure cloud infrastructure and how to secure it. And, when we do these assessments for our SaaS clients, we're constantly seeing new tools that they want us to even test that are SaaS tools that are integrated into their cloud environment. And so like you have to understand how these things are configured. And so like being able to get development is critical. Like I think there's no more of a more important skill set, in my opinion, in most security roles than first getting an understanding of how to actually code, not using the tool to code, because look, there are some great tools coming out that allow someone to very quickly put together production quality code. But if you don't know the fundamentals of how to determine what's like truly legitimate and is going to be executable without an error or bug that go into production, you're still going to get left behind. And that's the challenge we're seeing with the junior developers coming out, is like they are, wanting to use these tools so quickly and they don't have the experience of what goes wrong and how to fix those things so that they can actually use the tools correctly. So I see that being a big one. And then a lot of growth in the area of military or DoD kind of focused technology companies coming out of the Silicon Valley area, huge areas of growth. We've taken on a lot of those companies as clients, and so interesting to see this area of like hardware, software, embedded, kind of mixing in with a focus around obviously security and compliance around these regulations like the Cybersecurity Maturity Model, CMMC, and having to ensure high-level encryption in the cloud environments like AWS GovCloud or GCC High for Azure, or GCP now, right, has their own version of that. And you're seeing these big contracts being won by like OpenAI, right, to kind of look at how can they go into these legacy areas of the government and implement cutting edge technology and automation and AI to take a lot, and that's unfortunately it's taking a lot of jobs. We saw that with Doge, and like all of the firings that have happened. I mean, that's definitely affected the candidates I talked to, that either I'm trying to recruit, sometimes into these industries, but a lot of times they're coming out of these older companies that don't get it. So those are kind of some of the trends we're seeing. Of course, we saw a huge bubble that I haven't really talked about when Bitcoin started going up in value, pretty much around January timeframe. That's kind of when we started seeing a lot of crypto companies coming to us looking for new security leaders. They had new funding. They're more concerned. We had some major hacks that have hit that industry. And so we were going through, I think at one point we had like 4 or 5 VP of security or head of security roles for all Web3, different types of Web3 companies that were building technology, either, like a protocol level or, Web3 gaming or, kind of some interesting spaces. But that's kind of cooled down a little bit. We're definitely still taking on a lot of like blockchain development. That's a different team that I don't really work very closely with. But these are some of the trends that I'm seeing kind of in my world, and skill sets are definitely heavily focused around development. If you don't know development, you are going to get left behind in most roles. Now, there is still a place for folks that know, like our generalists. I think I'm seeing still a need for that. But then there's always the gaps, right? Can you learn cloud? They want you to know a little bit of everything when you're a generalist. So it's you also have to know.
No, and that's the balance, right? Earlier I was talking about a generalist, but needs to be hands-on, right? So they expect you to be able to log on to, an AWS console and set up, controls and guard duty or cloud trails, whatever some of the controls are.
Yeah.
Or encryption or, secure baseline, configs for the different services. So that's expected for, director of security type roles for a company with 500 employees.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting to be a generalist and a specialist at the same time, right? And, security people aren't always typically the best communicators either. And that's, more of an expectation these days too, that you're able to communicate to a non-technical audience. You're able to articulate, what the risk and issues are that you're seeing and why you need resources, right? So that you can justify, what the spends are and just to keep what you're getting versus even the net new ask. I can't tell you, how many companies that I've talked to in the last year that have lost security budget because they didn't have a good story, right? And when I say, budget, these are their EDR spends, right? So imagine, a company has CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is generally on the more expensive side, and then they cut that budget in half, right? So I've seen that, and to me, I think the challenge there for the individuals are they telling a good enough story on the cybersecurity side?
Yeah.
Do their, boards or executives understand the risk of, cutting, you're cutting tool costs there. You're not cutting, headcount or people. You're cutting a capability potentially, right? There's other products you can go to, that can be comparable, but CrowdStrike is a well-known one, right? So those are some of the budget challenges that I see where, we've had some engagements where we've helped kind of set a little bit more of an expectation for board levels and executives in terms of what the spends are, what the industry looks like, and where they, where their risks are and where they're kind of lacking to kind of counter some of those discussions. But, I think that's going to be something we're going to keep seeing, right? And I think the vendors know that as well, right? So I do see the trends with vendors becoming more competitive. I see SentinelOne, dropping price to go after CrowdStrike customers because of, that trend, for example. So
a lot of competition going on, a lot of acquisitions for the bigger players. They're looking at who's innovating and creating the next solution, leveraging AI, and then they're gobbling them up. So we're seeing a ton of acquisitions. Not as many IPOs in the security space. I feel like it's a lot of acquisitions, right? Like one of our customers on the recruiting side was acquired by a pretty big player out there. I won't say who, or you'll know who our customer is. But it's fascinating to watch how these larger players are buying up companies and then leveraging how can I stay ahead of the competition. I can't be as fast and innovative internally. I have to find that from a startup. It's typically what we're seeing. And, we saw it when you and I went to a couple plug and play events and seeing the innovative new companies that were coming out there, and from a broad perspective, starting to see how bigger companies come in and find those new exciting startups with, so I think there's still this hunger and this excitement around innovation that is kind of like the .com era or the cloud era, right? I think we're there with AI. It is fun to watch. There's a lot of great ideas, and then there's some companies that are not doing so well, just like it always happens that way. It's exciting to work with great founders that are innovative, that are coming up with new ideas. One of the customers we're supporting on a head of engineering, which is interesting, they're focused around at detection and response inside the browser. That's become a huge target for some pretty sophisticated attacks. I don't know if you've been following that at all, but hey, look, I know what I do. I'm in Google Chrome or Firefox all day long. I mean, that's literally where I spend most of my day outside of my, apps that are like Slack, but they're all SaaS apps. And so the majority of the attacks they're seeing, they're not even hitting the endpoint. And so you've got companies that are innovating and building in new frameworks within the web. And the entire access to the web has changed so much that you can literally build a tool in a web extension, like a like a Chrome extension or, one of those, and be able to offer services that were never able to be offered at an earlier stage to catch things that are happening. So I'm seeing some interesting innovations there too. It's really fascinating. There's just so much to keep up with.
Yeah. You talk about kind of acquisitions and integrations. We do see a lot of tech due diligence that, wrapped around the value of security in these transactions. And, I can't iterate that enough, right? I can't tell you how many times I've seen, poor hygiene on the cybersecurity side, whether you're a 20 employee company or a 1,000 employee company getting acquired. It will affect your bottom line, right? It will affect not only, the structure of your deal, but the price as well, right? And for good reason, right? You and I have talked about this on other podcasts and other forums as well, where if you have bad security hygiene, right, you're not only communicating that you lack controls and, things directly related to security, but into your overall organization, right? It could mean that, on the application development side, you might not be well structured there either, and you have tech debt. Same thing on the infrastructure and operations side, right? So security is generally a byproduct as well, where it can be an indicator if someone is looking to acquire you of whether you do, application development well, whether you have tech debt, whether, your product life cycle, has a feedback loop where you're paying down your tech debt, right? So, I do see that continuing to trend more up, meaning, there are more, companies are more double clicking these areas and making sure that they get the right visibility. And then it impacts, how the deal goes. And there's a number of deals that I've been a part of where, the second the transaction closes, not always is it a deal breaker, because at the end of the day, it takes money to fix some of these problems. They're not, impossible problems to solve. They want help from the outside to help fix some of these problems, right? They don't have the trust in that company post the transaction to fix these things. So they're going to be bringing in, new CTO, CISO type of engagement partners to help fix those areas. Those trends are continuing to go that way. I think, there's playbooks just wrapped around them. I can't tell you how many times, I interact with a company and I ask them if they're doing security monitoring, and the answer is no. It's 2025. If you're not doing monitoring through like an EDR or MDR service or some kind of MSSP, who has eyes on your controls? How do you know you're not, today affected?
Yeah.
But, that's an investment. And if you don't have money, to invest, it's not going to hurt you until it hurts you.
What are some of I was going to ask you, okay, you've seen 300 different companies now. How, maybe if you could talk about, and I know this is on the fly, bro, so I'm going to grab you on this, but maybe top 5 mistakes that you're seeing companies make regularly that you have to come in and kind of help fix.
Oh, I feel like I can rise up to this challenge. Okay. Number 1, don't have cyber insurance.
Oh.
Or even worse, have cyber insurance, but don't meet the obligation of cyber insurance. And then they have an event and they get denied their claim.
Ouch. Okay.
And that is a real thing. If you have cyber insurance and you haven't read it, and it says you're supposed to have, for example, security training for your employees, and you don't, they will not pay your claim. Period.
Dang. That could be millions of dollars worth of losses.
Absolutely. And people rely on cyber insurance as a mitigating control.
Yeah.
Where, if they're not going to fix the issue or directly deal with an issue, they have a, safety net to give them money for an event.
Wow.
So that's number 1. Number 2 is the lack of, conversations at the executive and board level around cybersecurity. Right? It's just not something they talk about. It's not something they think about. So what happens is, a company, especially in the tech space, will operate for years and build bad culture around cybersecurity, right? They don't create that feedback loop early, and they create a ton of tech debt. And then at some point in time in the future, for some reason, whether it's compliance driven or they have a security event, now they have to triple their investment in security and try to change their culture. Where, if they could have just started all at the beginning, right, kind of created that feedback loop, make sure, that security is a conversation that they're having at the executive level to hold them accountable, it's something they could avoid it. So I would say that's 2. 3 is as simple as I just mentioned to you. They don't have the right tools and controls for monitoring, right? They don't have EDR products. Yeah, they don't have EDR products. They don't have security monitoring. It's just completely, not on their radar whatsoever. Number 4 would be backups. They don't have immutable backups. Ugh. And they, and people think, hey, I'm using a SaaS service. They're backed up. They're not. Microsoft 365 has limitations on what's backed up as a default. GitHub has limitations what's backed up as a default. And if you've never tested and validated what's actually being backed up, and you have a ransomware event, you're screwed.
Wow.
And then number 5 would be just being prepared for an event, right? I can't tell you how many times I come into a scenario, and we don't do IR or any kind of response kind of engagement. We're more proactive, we're more strategic in our engagements. I can't tell you how many times I come into a scenario post a security event where we find out, they had an incident response plan, or they had a business continuity plan, or they had, DR run books, but it had never been exercised, tested, and trained, right? So it's that preparedness to not only, know what to do, but your teams have tried it, whether it's through a tabletop or an actual simulated scenario, and they have done it, and you've measured that and you've made improvements on it year over year. So just that lack of being prepared, right, is going to hurt you when something is happening. And if you follow industry news in terms of ransomware, like Ingrid Microme got hit not too long ago, right? So companies get hit left and right, whether they have good controls, they have investments or not, right? If someone's going to target you, they're going to come in one way or another. It takes one user to click. So it's having eyes on glass, having the playbook and the training to know what to do when something is happening, so that you're not freaking out while things are getting encrypted in your environment, and trying to just react. So those would be my top 5. How did I do?
Yeah, it was spot on, man. And actually, those are topics we've had in other conversations on this podcast. I remember when we did with Heath and Pete, where we talked a lot about the issues that they see when they go into an engagement, and how often the company doesn't have a proper backup. They haven't tested it. They didn't know where it was, or they didn't realize that most of it was going to get destroyed if they didn't have it in the right place. Yeah.
But what surprised me the most after 300 plus assessments is the problems are all the exact same. That surprised me. I thought it was going to be, very sexy in terms of like the problems. They're embedded in the product, it's APIs, all these things. No, it's the same, 5 issues that you see, day in and day out. But, that leads me to think why, right? I feel like sometimes I could be a philosopher. And, when I think of why, I think about, think about how companies think about security. They put security in the same bucket as like compliance and operational cost, right? So they see it as something that's necessary. They don't see it as an opportunity. They don't see it as a differentiator, right? And when you have that mindset, you're generally going to be reactive, right? And you're going to be doing the minimum until, there's a reason for you to do more. And unless, the CEO or, the main person driving that company's culture is security minded, that's the trend, right? Yeah. So you're always kind of lagging. And then, think about how, security is integrated at a company, right? A startup, security being baked into your products that you're offering or your services you're creating, they're generally not, right? People are throwing out a WAF and, doing some very basic stuff on an annual basis and saying, yep, we're baking security into our products, right? But that's, we talked about product security with someone from Netflix, right? And he helped us kind of understand what the good product security look like, right? And it's all about doing it up front and being part of the design process and, making sure that, when we say security, it's not just getting hacked, it's the availability of those services as well.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really important too. I feel like we're in a cancel culture where if your service is not available, that's going to trend. and not in a good way.
I think a lot of it's human nature changes that need to be made, right? So it's, there's always the people, processes, and technology. The people issue is still a challenge, and I think there's a couple factors, right? Like, think about this, like, both of us are pretty healthy, right? We both are active in the gym. A lot of the friends that I have are pretty active as well. So, like, my influence and my habits have been developed by being around people that are similar. I think that's where you're talking about, like, leadership top down, right? If it's a security-minded culture, you're going to see security focus throughout the culture and the thread of the organization. And the other thing is the collaboration across teams. I find that, and I remember we talked with James Zoller from Netflix when he was talking about this, and he was at Humane as well, where, he was constantly actively meeting with team members from totally different departments. And they were all collaborating across the business because it all connected. And you have to see people as valuable in every department to how you think about, integrating security. You also need to see how they think and the habits that have been developed, and how do you support each other in creating a culture that's transparent, open. There's not these silos that tend to happen, especially you look at some of the bigger companies. They allow silos. I've seen silos happen at smaller companies, right? Where nobody's communicating with each other, and there's just this. So you have to be intentional in that communication, who you spend your time with. The other thing I'm seeing is a lot of companies are moving back to on-site, hybrid, or face-to-face 5 days a week. And I think that's actually good in a lot of ways. The reason why I say that is because I think you have more opportunity when you're in an environment together. Not always, depends on how this company's set up, but to actually, like, physically be more involved in, meetings with each other. And, sometimes you get lazy when it's virtual. It depends.
Well, not only do we get lazy, but we're also very habit driven. So, like, trying to get someone back into an office after 4 years, it might not be possible.
It's hard, right? And I'm seeing it. I think more of the, I think I have to hit a little bit of this with age. I think, the younger generation has an easier time coming back into an office, right? And, when people are in different phases of life, when you're where we are in our 30s, 40s, I think it's harder because, we have kids. You get used to working remotely. You have this, you're pretty on top of things, diligent, good work ethic. And you don't really need to be face-to-face to be effective. But some companies are trying to build that culture. So now, you have this shift of, okay, what do you do with the folks that need the flexibility to be remote because they've already gotten used to this? They live in unique areas. Their kids are in, schools where they have to drive or whatever it is that drives their remote lifestyle. So I think that's a factor in how a culture is built in a company and how security is looked at. But it can be done in any of those environments. It really is the leadership has to be key. I remember when we brought Wayne on to the podcast, he was talking about cybersecurity leadership. It really all starts at leadership. It's so important that you're, the leadership of a company. So that's, I guess, another question before we wrap up for you, because I think this is fascinating what I'm learning from you today. But, like, what are some of the things you see in these 300 companies from a leadership perspective where they are doing things right? Have you noticed a trend of the type of leadership you interact with?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get a mixed batch, right? So, I can't tell you how many times I've seen good leaders, but then they don't have enough resources, right? So they are put into very difficult situations.
Yeah.
And then, you're driving them out. They want to leave, immediately if they can, right? Because they can see the future and they can see where things are trending down or, investments are getting tighter. And they know, when their security event happens, and it will happen, they're going to be held, personally liable potentially, right? And, that's not a good trend. That's not, where people perform their best.
No,
right?
agreed.
So, it does come back to the culture part as well. But, I've seen bad leaders as well, right? I've seen bad leaders that love power, and, security is a great place that, those individuals can hide. Right. And, seem like they're effective because they love authority and telling what others should do. But those aren't effective leaders either. Right. So there's challenges in those type of leaders. Security is the one area where I've seen the most diverse type of leadership. There's good, there's bad, and there's ugly. Right. There's no rhyme or rhythm to it. It just depends on the individuals. But, I think, in general, I like to assume people want to do their best and put out the best product. But, a lot of times when I do engage people that are difficult, I try to kind of bring them back to what they're trying to do and why. And there's a disconnect, right? So there's, security people that want tools and, investments. But then I ask them, well, what is your business doing? What's the next 6 months look like in terms of your product roadmap? And where are your risks, a year down the road? And there's a disconnect there, right? And those disconnects show up to their leadership as well, where they might not understand that. And, that could be the reason why they're not getting that investment or they don't have that trust, right? Because they're disconnected from, the organization and what the organization is trying to achieve. Don't forget, at the end of the day, cybersecurity is part of the business. It's not a standalone, function that's there to police, right? It's there to protect the company's investment. Right? And it's got different tools in its belt to do that. And, at the end of the day, if the company chooses not to invest, you don't own that risk. You need to take that risk and bubble it up to your executives and to your board and make sure that you're a good communicator so that others understand that risk. And, I've seen leaders where, they haven't done a good job there, right? So then they're stuck with, they know where all the dead bodies are, but they don't know how to communicate that up. And they feel trapped, right? They're trapped between, running the day-to-day madness and then, taking on more risks and taking on more risks. And the company now wants to go international or they want to add this and that. So.
Yeah, communication's key there when it comes to like the ability for these great security leaders to understand the business needs. I agree with you. I think that's a one connection that I've noticed in recruiting. When you get a great candidate, what makes them great to a company? It's usually people skills, so soft skills, still so important. And we're seeing a degradation of this in this next generation because of so much time on screens and texting. And, I see it with my kids, like you don't learn how to build social skills as much as you used to have to. And it's hurting this next generation coming in because you need to communicate. You need to know how to communicate effectively, professionally, and understand, how to, protect some of the things you say. Don't say everything that comes out of your, mind. And I feel like, the freedom of being able to put things out on social media and all these messaging apps, it doesn't create the level of like discipline that you need as a communicator. And then the other side is like really getting interested in the business that you're a part of. That goes a long way. If you understand the business, you understand the needs of the business, and I would always recommend take at least 1 or 2 business courses if you're in college, so you kind of understand how businesses work. If you're going to be in cybersecurity, I think that skill and like something that forces you to be in situations where you have to develop social skills and communication skills, like Toastmasters as an example, a great organization to be a part of, to build those communication skills as a technical person, that if you're naturally very introverted, great, but you're going to have to learn to communicate. It's really the differentiator of how you're going to get ahead, especially when you have to get out there and interview and talk about yourself and be able to articulate what you did, how you did it, how it affected the business. That's what leaders want to know. And so I do see people get so caught up on the details of what they did and versus why they did it and how it helped the company that they miss that in interviews because they're just naturally so technical, but they don't have that mind to articulate it into words. It's interesting how we see some of the crossover. There's some similarities, of course, in how to run a good organization and then how that connects to hiring good people, what those people look like. Yeah,
for sure. And, I do worry about soft skills and, just being a generalist for the next generation, right? We both have kids and, cybersecurity, I think, is a good place to be, right? I think, I don't think jobs are going to go away anytime soon. Even, as tools and other things become more automated, I think, there'll be potentially less jobs, but they're going to be more specialized, right? So it's still going to be very much a key focus area as technology evolves. But, to your point, it's going to be a well-balanced individual that needs to be entering the job market, whether, it's being, having the soft skills, including being social, being able to innovate with his peers in a room with a whiteboard, to having the skills to log on to, an application or even be able to use AI to, be successful at their job. They're going to have a variety of tools in their belt to be successful. right? It's not going to just be, as it's been in the past, right? We're seeing that evolution now where, by the time our kids are growing up and entering the job market, hopefully it's going to be something that, as parents, we can prepare them for. Same for people that are looking for jobs now. The one biggest challenge that I see here, and this is a people problem, is accountability, right? I can't tell you how many times I meet people that see the problem, see the gaps, but then they don't change anything.
Yeah.
Right? You were talking about hygiene and fitness earlier. You have to have discipline. You have to have a drive. You have to have a vision. And these things all evolve over time, right? Like I remember 20 years ago, I had a vision. And, that vision, now it gets changed on a daily basis. But what doesn't get changed is my discipline and my drive, right? Those things, I have to, make sure I'm constantly feeding them and showing up being my best version so that I can be successful. Otherwise, I do worry, like you said, for the next generation that's not going into an office, that doesn't leave their chair, doesn't work out, doesn't have social skills. Like, that's not a good place to be. You're not setting yourself up for success.
Agree. Yeah, it is, you connect back to bad habits, our bad habits, no matter what generation we're talking about. And today, in 2025, it's the easiest it's ever been to either have really good habits or really bad habits. Have you noticed that? Like you either see like the extreme of one or the other for the most part, Through
convenience, right? Through convenience,
exactly.
We have kind of removed the middle. It's either you're this way or that way.
Yeah. And I think it affects organizations. When you look for those folks that have discipline, that have shown discipline in other parts of their life, whether that be when they were a child, getting into, sports or events that required them to learn discipline, martial arts, chess club, whatever that might be that, kids get involved in early, to be able to develop the discipline. And then, like you said, health habits to keep your mind and body strong, because cybersecurity is a very difficult field. It's stressful on the body and the mind, right? Recruiting can be stressful too. And so it's like you have to continue to take care of those two things, getting enough sleep, all those basic things as well. I think, creating a culture of health is important, right? And a lot of the organizations that we support sometimes don't do that very well. Yeah. People burn out.
They burn out their people.
They burn out their people. Yeah. So speaking of burned out, I think it's probably time. We don't want to burn out our audience here with our podcast. But yeah, this was fun. I think it was good to just catch up folks to what we see in our world, what trends we're noticing. And we're going to really try to focus on releasing 2 episodes a month with exciting guests this year and securing the future. Our passion is security. It's looking into the future. It's, and we see it from 2 different perspectives, as you can tell, right? We see it from the practitioner side, as well as the kind of hiring trends and building of companies through talent. So I think those 2 perspectives for us has just been fun to constantly, bring interesting guests on, have 2 different ways of looking at, asking them questions. And we hope this continues to provide value to our listeners. So yeah, Ramin, lots of fun catching up on this podcast and chatting. We're excited about more episodes this year. And we'll talk again soon.
All right. Awesome. Take care.
Take care.